Can you tell the story of the Caravaggio on Leeson Street? Or
sure.
in Leeson Street. You, maybe falsely, Lycett speaks very highly of you, or is he accurate to give you credit for that happening?
Well, they do, and I think it's a little excessive, because what I decided was I was doing up the house, and we had a painting which I believe was by Honthorst. And Honthorst, I believed, was at the top of the second division championship, fighting to get into the first division. So I said, if I'm having the walls painted and I should certainly have this painting, which was worth a few million anyway. And I shouldn't neglect that for its own intrinsic value. And then I went to the assistant director of the National Gallery and asked, would he have any advice? But he said, we're obliged to look after paintings in private ownership if they are of outstanding quality, because they are part of our remit. So he said, if that is a Honthorst, certainly that should be restored, because on the painting itself was not Honthorst, or it was his nickname, Gerard della Notte, Gerard of the Night, but it was the grammar was incorrect. It should be no T and it's no Te, and that was commented upon. So people were looking out for a painting, but I didn't know that, and anyone I spoke to didn't know that. I came across it in some book when we were well down the road, discovering that it was a Caravaggio, and I didn't want to queer the pitch.
You weren't what?
I didn't want to queer the pitch.
Yes.
So he said, we'll get Benedetti, who is the curator of Italian paintings and who's very well up in Caravaggio and that era. And so he came down and he looked at it, and so did the assistant director. And then we went in, I said, we'll stay for a glass of wine or something. So they opted for sherry. And I always think of that as toasting the discovery of Caravaggio, because Benedetti said later, he said, when I saw it, my thing was, God, that's the best version of the missing Caravaggio, and good God, could it be the missing Caravaggio? So he said, we will certainly look after that. So they took it away and began the study, which established that it was a Caravaggio. They established it was original, the date was correct, his date, and that it was, and all the marks were Caravaggio, which he had worked on, like there were changes in it, and that, so it wasn't a fellow coming along seeing a Caravaggio and then copying it. So then one day, the rector came and said, could I see you this morning? I'll be going past your door. I was in Leeson Street at the time. Well, I said, sure. So he came in and I got up to welcome him. He said, sit down. You can't take what I'm going to tell you standing up. So he said, it's not by Honthorst. So I said, well, now this is really going to be bad news. He says, by Caravaggio. Well, I knew enough about painting to add on, put it vulgarly, to add on a few noughts onto its value. So, so much for liberal education. So then he said, but there's certain things has to be done before we can make an announcement. One, he said, Sir Dennis Mann must say it's a Caravaggio. He was of the Guinness family who had nothing to do in his life. He had born a millionaire and he spent his life on art. And he was an expert on, and he's left a lot to the National Gallery here. He said he is the expert on Caravaggio, and if he says it's not Caravaggio, that's the end of it. No one will believe it's a Caravaggio, no matter what evidence is produced. So he said, we'll get him to say a few words. So they had some occasion and they invited him to it. And they asked him, we've got something to show you here, said Dennis. Who painted that painting? In 5 seconds, said Caravaggio, of course. So that, so, and he said to me when I handed over the painting on behalf of the Society to the National Gallery on indefinite loan. And he showed me around the various copies and one that had put the name forward. And the one that had put the name forward most definitely was Odessa, which we heard a bit about these days in the war, in the Crimea. But he said, you see that painter who did the Odessa, he's a magnificent painter, but he has a great one weakness, which was a Caravaggio's strength. Look at his fingers. So I looked all right to me. And he said, those fingers are like sausages. And he said, that writes him off. But he was very loud in his praise, except at one point, which was a great help to him. So that's roughly. But one interesting thing was when we were told that I could allow the community know, of course, but we weren't to speak about it, and we imposed on ourselves a vow of Trappist silence, and we didn't even speak casually to one another about it until the news broke. And the news broke in a very interesting way. A very cunning journalist phoned up lots of people whom he thought might know something about it, and just saying, about this Caravaggio, that was a great idea of yours. So Moses said, what are you talking about? Except when he got on to Benedetti, he started stumbling and hooing an eye, and he said, he's the man, it's the National Gallery.
So if that hadn't happened, would it have remained a secret?
Oh no, it would have come out. Because you couldn't, what were we to do with it? When they asked, how did it get to you? It came to us, a Mattei family had the original. They had it. They got doing broke, and they sold off all that stuff to a Nesbitt family for a knockdown price, because a lady called Lee Wilson came along and bought it for 8 guineas. It was part of a job lot. And then she was married to a British Army officer who was home on sick leave from the trenches and given something to do. He was put in charge of the prisoners in 1916, having been taken from the GPO on the way to the prison. He humiliated them. One man in particular, Clark. And in the film on De Valera, there was a scene of that being done, and Michael Collins going out to box this fella, and De Valera, leave it there, Michael, we'll get him in time, but don't do anything rash. So they murdered him. And this got on Mrs. Lee Wilson's mind, and it kind of discombobulated her completely. And she went to Father Finlay, in other words, an in-law of the lady we saw going in there. And he was a great confidant of hers. And as a sign of how much she owed him, she must have arrived one day with a truck and present the painting to Leeson Street as a gift to the community, recognising how good Father Finlay was.
So it was gifted to the Jesuits?
Gifted to the Jesuits. And fortunately there was no one contesting the gifting. So then what were we to do with it? Well, I said something which I had no authority whatsoever to say. I said to the Deputy Director of the National Gallery, I said, of course, the place for this painting is the National Gallery. So he probably wrote that down several times, that Barber said to me. And of course, I had no authority, but that didn't matter. A Jesuit said it, and a Jesuit who was responsible for the painting said it. So it couldn't be taken back. Well, I was delighted it couldn't be taken back. So that's roughly the story.
Well, thank you for recounting that. I'm sure you've been asked about that a lot.
A fair amount.